I found a note in her pocket, "Meet me at 10 tonight, as always." Signed with a single letter M. It was scribbled on a torn piece of paper, the kind you'd rip from a notebook in a hurry, and it was tucked deep in the side pocket of her gray coat, the one she always wore to work. I wasn't snooping, not really. She'd asked me to grab her keys before she left that morning, and my fingers brushed against it. The words hit me like a jolt, sharp and unexpected, but I didn't let it show. Not yet. I stood there in our quiet hallway, the early evening light filtering through the blinds, and read it again. Meet me at 10 tonight, as always. As always? What did that mean? Who was M? Her name's Lauren. My wife. We've been married 8 years, together for 10. I'm Nathan, 38, a financial analyst who spends his days buried in spreadsheets and market trends. People say I'm calm, maybe too calm, like I've got everything figured out. I like patterns, predictability. It's why I'm good at my job. But this? This wasn't a number I could crunch or a forecast I could adjust. This was a crack in the foundation of everything I thought I knew. I slipped the note back where I found it, careful to fold it just as it had been, and set her coat back on the hook by the door. My mind was already racing, but I kept my face steady. Lauren was still at the office, or so she'd said. Lately, her hours had been stretching longer. Client meetings, she'd explain with a quick smile, brushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. You know how it is. And I'd nod, because I did know how it was. She's a marketing consultant, 35, the kind of person who lights up a room without trying. Charming, impulsive, always chasing the next big idea. I used to love that about her. Now, it felt like a spotlight swinging away from me. The house was silent as I moved to the kitchen, the note's words looping in my head. I poured a glass of water, the faucet humming faintly, and leaned against the counter. M. It could be anyone, right? A client, a friend, a coworker. But the as always stuck with me, heavy and deliberate. It wasn't a one-time thing. It was a routine. A secret. My stomach twisted, but I pushed it down. I'm not the type to jump to conclusions. I need evidence, facts. Still, I couldn't shake the image of her slipping out the door tonight, that gray coat draped over her shoulders, heading somewhere I wasn't invited. She'd been different lately. Subtle things, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention, and I'll admit, I hadn't always been. She'd started wearing a new perfume, something sharp and floral that lingered in the air after she left her room. Her phone was always face down now, buzzing more than it used to. Once, I caught her laughing at a message, her fingers flying across the screen, and when I asked who it was, she'd waved it off. Just work, she'd said, her voice a little too bright. I'd let it go. Maybe I shouldn't have. I glanced at the clock, 7:42 p.m. She'd be home soon, unless she had another late meeting. I could ask her about the note, watch her face, see if she flinched. But what if she lied? What if she didn't? Either way, I wasn't ready for that conversation, not without knowing more. I set the glass down, the cold condensation slick against my palm, and walked back to the hallway. Her coat hung there, innocent as ever, but that note was a live wire now, humming with questions I couldn't ignore. I thought about M. We'd met her coworkers before, at holiday parties, casual dinners. There was a Marcus in her office, wasn't there? Tall, loud, the kind of guy who clapped you on the shoulder like you'd been friends forever. She'd mentioned him once or twice, always with a laugh. Marcus is such a character, she'd say, her eyes crinkling. I'd never thought much of it. Now, his name felt like a splinter under my skin. Was it him? Or was I building this up in my head, turning nothing into something? The front door clicked open, and I froze. Lauren stepped inside, shaking off a light drizzle from her hair. She looked tired but put together, black heels, gray coat, that smile she always wore when she saw me. Hey, she said, hanging her purse on the rack. You're still up? Yeah, I said, keeping my tone even. Rough day? She shrugged, kicking off her shoes. Same old chaos. You know how it goes. I nodded, watching her move toward the kitchen. Her coat swayed slightly on the hook, the pocket bulging just enough to remind me what was inside. Anything interesting happen? I asked, casual as I could manage. Not really, she said, her voice floating back to me. Just meetings. Oh, I might be late again tomorrow, big project wrap up. Right, I said, my throat tightening. Late again. She didn't catch the edge in my voice, or maybe she did and chose to ignore it. I followed her into the kitchen, leaning against the doorway as she poured herself a glass of wine. Her movements were smooth, practiced, like nothing was wrong. But something was. I could feel it, creeping up my spine, cold and insistent. Everything okay? She asked, glancing at me over the rim of her glass. Her eyes were steady, but there was a flicker there, something quick, like a shadow passing over water. Yeah, I lied, forcing a smile. Just tired. She nodded, sipping her wine, and for a moment, we stood there in silence. The note burned in my mind, a question I couldn't ask yet. Who's M? What's happening at 10 tonight? And why did it feel like the woman I'd built my life with was slipping through my fingers? I didn't know the answers, not yet. But I was going to find out. One way or another, I'd get to the truth. And when I did, I'd figure out what came next. I couldn't sleep that night. The note's words asterisk meet me at 10 tonight, as always. M asterisk looped in my head like a broken record, each repetition tightening the knot in my chest. Lauren lay beside me, her breathing soft and steady, oblivious to the storm raging in my mind. Part of me wanted to shake her awake, demand answers, but I knew better. If I confronted her now, she'd deny it, spin a story, and I'd be left with nothing but doubt. I needed proof, something concrete, undeniable. So I waited. The next morning, I went through the motions, coffee, toast, a quick goodbye as she left for work. Her kiss lingered on my cheek, cool and routine, but my skin prickled with unease. I watched her car disappear down the street, then called my boss. Taking a personal day, I said, my voice flat. He didn't ask questions. I don't take days off often. Back in the house, I stood in the hallway, staring at her coat still hanging by the door. The note was still there, folded in the pocket, but I didn't touch it. Instead, I grabbed my laptop and sat at the kitchen table, the screen's glow harsh in the morning light. If Lauren was hiding something, there'd be a trail, emails, texts, something. I just had to find it. We'd always shared passwords, a habit from when we first moved in together. Trust, she'd called it. Now, it felt like a lifeline. I logged into our shared cloud account, my fingers steady on the keys. Photos, documents, backups, nothing unusual at first. Then I saw it, a folder named Work Projects, last updated 2 days ago. Inside were files labeled with client names, but one caught my eye: M_updates. I clicked it open. It wasn't work. It was a series of photos of Lauren and Marcus, the coworker I'd suspected. They were at a restaurant, her hand on his arm, both laughing. Another showed them in a park, his arm around her waist. My throat tightened as I scrolled through the images, each one a punch to the gut. The timestamps stretched back months, long before the note, long before I'd noticed anything wrong. I leaned back in the chair, my hands trembling slightly. It wasn't just a fling, it was a relationship. A secret life she'd built behind my back. I closed the laptop, the screen snapping shut with a soft click, and stared at the wall. The evidence was there, undeniable, but it didn't feel real. Not yet. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The note said tonight, and tonight was now. If she was meeting him again, I'd be there to witness it. I wasn't sure what I'd do: confront them, take photos, or just watch, but I couldn't stay in the dark any longer. That evening, Lauren came home at her usual time, her smile bright as she kissed my cheek. "How was your day?" she asked, setting her bag down. "Fine," I said, my voice steady. "Quiet." She nodded, moving to the kitchen to start dinner. I watched her chop vegetables, her movements fluid and familiar, and wondered how she could act so normal. How she could stand there, lying to my face with every breath. My stomach churned, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd learned to mask my feelings long ago, part of the job, part of who I was. After dinner, she glanced at her watch. "I've got that late meeting again," she said, her tone casual. "Probably won't be back till after 10. I nodded, sipping my coffee. "All right. Drive safe." She grabbed her coat, the gray one, and headed out the door. I waited 5 minutes, then grabbed my keys and followed. The city lights blurred past as I trailed her car, keeping a safe distance. She drove to a part of town I didn't know well, a quiet street lined with brownstones and small cafes. She parked outside a brick building, and I pulled over a block away, watching. Lauren stepped out, glancing around before walking to the door. She didn't knock, she pulled out a key and let herself in. My breath caught. A key. The note had said, "Don't forget the key." This was their place, her and Marcus's. I sat there, the engine idling, my hands gripping the wheel. Part of me wanted to storm in, catch them in the act, but I couldn't move. The truth was already clear, and seeing it wouldn't change anything. Instead, I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the building, the address glowing under the streetlight. Evidence, if I needed it later. Minutes passed, maybe hours, I lost track. Finally, I started the car and drove home, the silence in the house deafening. I poured another coffee, though my hands shook too much to drink it, and sat at the table, waiting. When Lauren came back at 11:15, she looked relaxed, almost happy. "Hey," she said, hanging up her coat. "You're still up?" "Yeah," I said, my voice low. "Couldn't sleep." She frowned slightly, stepping closer. "Everything okay?" I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. "We need to talk." Her smile faltered, just for a second, but she recovered quickly. "About what?" "About Marcus," I said, watching her face. "And the note in your coat." The color drained from her cheeks, her eyes widening. "What note?" I stood, pulling the folded paper from my pocket and holding it up. "This one. Meet me at 10 tonight, as always. I found it yesterday. And I followed you tonight, Lauren. I saw you go into that building. With a key." She opened her mouth, then closed it, her hands trembling. "Nathan, it's not what you think." "Don't," I cut her off, my voice sharp. "Don't lie to me. I saw the photos on the cloud. You and him. 4 months. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't soften. "How long?" I asked, my tone cold. "Since last summer," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the room. "It just happened? You've been lying to me for almost a year, and that's your excuse?" "I'm sorry," she sobbed, reaching for my hand. "I love you, Nathan. I do. I was just confused." I pulled away, stepping back. "Confused? You're not a teenager, Lauren. You're my wife." She crumpled onto the couch, her face in her hands, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. The betrayal was too raw, too deep. I trusted her with everything, and she'd thrown it away. "I need time," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos inside. "I can't do this right now." She looked up, mascara streaking her cheeks. "Please, don't leave. We can fix this." I shook my head, grabbing my jacket. "I'm going to a motel. I'll figure out what's next later." As I walked out, her sobs followed me, but I didn't look back. The night air hit me, cold and bracing, but it didn't numb the ache in my chest. I'd uncovered the truth, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the end of everything. The motel room I'd holed up in for 2 nights was a drab box of beige walls and flickering lights, the kind of place that felt like a pause in reality. I'd spent those hours staring at a water stain on the ceiling, replaying the moment I'd dropped the note, proof of Lauren's affair, on our kitchen table and watched her face fall apart. Her first words had been weak, "It just happened," as if that erased months of deceit. I'd walked out before she could finish, before my anger could spill into something uglier. But the quiet hadn't dulled it. If anything, it had sharpened it, turned it into a cold, precise blade. I needed more than her excuses. I needed the truth, or as close as she could get to it. So, I texted her, meet me at the house. 7 p.m. No warmth, no wiggle room. Her reply came fast, okay. No groveling, no promises. Maybe she knew they'd fall flat. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked unchanged, trimmed grass, porch light glowing, but it felt like a stranger's. I unlocked the door with the key still on my ring and stepped inside. Lauren sat at the kitchen table, hands clasped, eyes swollen from crying. She looked up as I entered. "You're here," she said, her voice fragile. I stayed standing. "You said it just happened. Explain that." She swallowed hard, fingers fidgeting. "I don't know where to start." "Start with Marcus," I said, keeping my tone even. "How did it begin?" Her gaze dropped. "Last summer. The office retreat. We were both stressed, working late on the campaign. One night, we got drinks after, and it went too far." "Too far," I repeated, the phrase sour on my tongue. "And you kept going back." 4 months. Her head jerked up, eyes pleading. "It wasn't like that." I tried to stop, but. "But what?" I stepped closer, voice still controlled. "You couldn't help yourself? You were lonely? What's the excuse this time?" "I was scared," she whispered. "Scared of losing you, of admitting it. I thought if I ended it quietly, you'd never know." A laugh escaped me, short and bitter. "And that worked out great, didn't it?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as she flinched. "I'm sorry, Nathan. I am. I love you. Stop." My voice rose, cutting through the room. "Don't say that. You don't get to say that after what you did." She stood, reaching for me, but I stepped back. "I do love you," she said, her voice cracking. "I made a mistake, a horrible one, but I never stopped loving you." "Then why?" I demanded, hands balling into fists at my sides. "Why him? Why my coworker? Someone I trusted?" She sank back into the chair, face crumpling. "I don't know. He was just there. And I was weak." "Weak," I said, the word like a punch. "That's not weakness, Lauren. That's betrayal." She sobbed, shoulders shaking, but I couldn't reach out. The mental image of her with Marcus smiling, touching, hiding it all behind my back played on a loop. Every late night she'd blamed on work, every client meeting, every time she'd looked me in the eye and lied, it hit me like a tidal wave, rage and pain mixing into something I could barely control. "Do you know what it's like?" My voice dropped, icy and sharp. "To find out the person you trusted most has been lying to you for months? To see the proof, to follow you to that motel and watch you walk in like it was nothing?" Her head snapped up, eyes wide. "You followed me?" "Yes," I said, no hesitation. "And I saw everything. The key, the way you let yourself in. It wasn't just a fling, Lauren. You had a whole other life." "It wasn't like that," she cried. "It was a mistake, but I never loved him. It was just escape." "Escape from what?" I snapped. "From me? From our marriage?" "From myself," she said, voice breaking. I felt trapped, like I was losing who I was. "You were always so focused, so sure, and I didn't know how to keep up." I stared at her, the words sinking in. "So this is my fault? Because I worked hard, because I tried to build something for us?" "No," she said, frantic. "No, it's not your fault. It's mine. I should have talked to you, but I didn't. I took the easy way out, and I hate myself for it." I turned away, pacing the kitchen, thoughts spinning. Part of me wanted to believe her, to think there was a way back, but the rational part, the part that had designed buildings to withstand storms, knew better. Trust wasn't a light switch. It was gone, and her tears couldn't bring it back. "What now?" she asked, voice trembling. are you leaving me? I stopped, facing her. I don't know yet. But I can't stay here. Not like this. She nodded, tears streaming. I'll do anything, Nathan. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. I shook my head. It's not that simple. You didn't just break a promise, you broke us. She reached for my hand again, but I pulled away. Please, she whispered. Don't give up on us. I looked at her, the woman I'd loved for 10 years, the one I'd planned a life with. But I also saw the lies, the betrayal, the irreparable damage. I need time, I said. Away from you, from this house. I'll figure out what's next. Okay, she said, her face etched with grief. Take all the time you need. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, my chest tight. The night air hit me as I stepped outside, crisp and unyielding. I didn't know where I'd go, back to the motel, maybe somewhere new. But one thing was clear, the life I'd had with Lauren was finished. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be the same. The motel room was a stark contrast to the life I'd built, bare walls, a sagging mattress, a flickering neon sign outside the window. It had been a week since I'd confronted Lauren about her affair with Marcus, my colleague and supposed friend. Her tearful apologies *I didn't mean for it to happen, I still love you * felt like sandpaper against my skin, abrasive and meaningless. I'd left that night, suitcase in hand, but the sting of her betrayal lingered, festering into something colder, sharper. Divorce wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the instability she'd injected into my world, and as an architect, I knew how to dismantle a foundation without anyone noticing until it was too late. I don't act impulsively. My work thrives on precision, on understanding how pieces fit together. Revenge, I decided, would be a project of its own, a design tailored to Lauren's weaknesses, executed with the same care I'd once put into our home. She valued appearances, predictability, the illusion of a perfect life. I'd strip those away, not with chaos, but with control. First, I targeted her sanctuary, the house I'd designed for us. She still lived there, assuming I'd abandoned it entirely. I hadn't. I returned one afternoon while she was at work, my keys still functional. Inside, I made adjustments only I'd recognize. I rerouted the irrigation system in the backyard, her pride and joy, so it overwatered her prized roses, drowning them slowly. In the kitchen, I recalibrated the oven's temperature sensor. Every meal she baked would burn or undercook, a quiet erosion of her domestic confidence. Subtle shifts, but they'd unraveled her sense of order over time. Then I turned to her possessions. Lauren cherished her collection of vintage books, displayed proudly on the living room shelves. I slipped in a few pages I'd printed, fictional letters from Marcus to an unnamed lover, vague enough to plant doubt but specific enough to mirror their affair. I can't stop thinking about last night, you make me feel alive. She'd find them eventually, tucked between pages, and wonder if they were real, if Marcus had betrayed her too. The uncertainty would gnaw at her, a crack in her trust widening with every reread. Her social world came next. Lauren thrived on her tight-knit circle of friends, a group I'd never fully warmed to. I crafted a plan to isolate her without raising suspicion. Using an old email account she'd forgotten we shared, I sent a group message to her closest friends, mimicking her tone, "Hey everyone, I need some space for a while. Work's overwhelming, and I'm just not myself. I'll reach out when I'm ready." I hit send, then deleted the evidence. They'd back off, assuming she was struggling, and she'd be left wondering why her phone had gone silent. The centerpiece, though, was more intricate. Lauren had a presentation coming up at work, a big pitch she'd been prepping for weeks. I still had access to our shared cloud drive, where she stored her files. I opened her slides and made edits so subtle they'd slip past a casual review. A key statistic shifted by a decimal point, a color scheme tweaked to clash just enough to jar the eye, a typo buried in the fine print. Nothing glaring, but enough to make her look sloppy, unprepared. She'd walk into that meeting confident, only to falter as the cracks showed. Her boss wouldn't fire her, but the dent to her reputation would linger. I saved the most personal move for last. Lauren's mother, Diane, had always liked me, called me the steady one. I mailed her a letter, handwritten, simple, * Diane, I'm leaving Lauren. She's been with someone else, and I can't stay. I didn't want you to hear it from her first. * I enclosed a photo from the cloud, Lauren and Marcus at a bar, his arm around her, both smiling. Diane would call her, furious, hurt, and Lauren's carefully curated family ties would fray under the weight of that conversation. Days later, she tracked me down at the motel. She looked smaller, frayed, dark circles under her eyes, her hair unkempt. "Nathan," she said, voice trembling, "what are you doing to me? My garden's ruined, my friends won't call, my presentation was a disaster. Even Mom thinks I'm a liar." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "I haven't done anything you didn't start." "What's that supposed to mean?" she snapped, stepping closer. "You broke us," I said, my voice low, even. "You and Marcus. I'm just rearranging the pieces you left." Her face crumpled. "I made a mistake, okay? I'm sorry." She reached out, then stopped, hands falling to her sides. "Please, Nathan. Stop this. We can still fix it." "There's no we anymore," I said. "You wanted freedom. Now you've got it, along with everything that comes with it." She stood there, silent, tears streaking her face, then turned and walked away. I shut the door, the click echoing in the quiet room. I'd expected relief, maybe triumph, but all I felt was a dull emptiness. Her life was tilting, yes, her comforts disrupted, her confidence shaken, but it didn't rebuild mine. The structure we'd had was gone, reduced to rubble by her choices and my retaliation. I sat on the bed, staring at the cracked ceiling. The house was hers to deal with now, along with the chaos I'd seeded. I'd move on soon, find a new space, draft a new life. For tonight, I poured a glass of water and stood by the window, the city sprawling below. Lauren would adapt, eventually, but she'd never forget the cost of crossing me. And that, I told myself, was enough. The city felt different now, as if it had shifted beneath my feet while I wasn't looking. I'd been holed up in a motel for nearly 2 weeks, the neon signs hum outside my window a constant drone, marking the distance between the life I'd planned and the one I was living. Revenge had been precise, each step calculated to unravel Lauren's world as she'd unraveled mine. I'd exposed her affair, turned her lies into public wreckage, and watched her crumble. But the victory I'd anticipated was a ghost. Instead, there was an emptiness, a hollow space where satisfaction should have been. As if I'd destroyed more than just her illusions, I'd erased the last traces of us. I needed to make sense of it, to sift through the debris of my emotions. So, I called her. "Meet me at the park," I said, my voice flat, controlled. "The one by the river. 3 p.m. She didn't push back, just murmured, "Okay," and the line went dead. The park was a neutral space, a place we'd once walked hand in hand, before the secrets and the betrayal. Maybe there, away from the house and its suffocating memories, I could find the words I'd been wrestling with. When I got there, she was already waiting, perched on a bench overlooking the river. She looked diminished, shoulders slumped, hands fidgeting with a tissue, her gray coat discarded beside her like a sheepskin. I approached, gravel crunching under my boots, and she stood as I neared. "Nathan," she said, her voice fragile. Her eyes were rimmed with red, her face pale and tired. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, motioning for her to sit. We settled on the bench, a chasm of silence between us, filled only by the river's distant murmur and the faint cry of a gull overhead. "I've been thinking," I started, keeping my tone even, my gaze fixed on the water. "About everything. About us." She turned to me, her expression caught between hope and dread. "And?" I exhaled, the air heavy in my chest. "I thought hurting you would fix it. That if I could make you feel even a piece of what I felt, it'd even the score. But it didn't. It just left nothing." She swallowed, her fingers stilling on the tissue. "I never wanted this, Nathan. I never meant to hurt you like that." "But you did," I said, sharper than I meant to. "You chose to lie, to sneak around with Marcus. You picked him over me, over everything we had." Tears brimmed in her eyes, but she held my gaze. "I know. I hate myself for it. I was selfish, stupid, I broke us. But I still love you. I always have. I shook my head, the words I'd planned dissolving. Love doesn't cut it, Lauren. Not now. You didn't just break my trust, you shattered it. Every time I picture you with him, it's like a blade in me. I can't live with that. She reached for my hand, hesitant, her fingers trembling. We could try counseling, therapy, anything. I'll do whatever it takes. I pulled away, the touch too raw. It's not about fixing it. It's about what's left to fix. You had a whole other life with him for months. How do I trust anything you say? Her face collapsed, and she swiped at her tears with the tissue. I don't know. But I want to try. I want to be who you thought I was. I stood, pacing a few steps, hands jammed in my pockets. The river flowed on, steady and uncaring. That's the problem, I said, turning back. The Lauren I thought I knew wouldn't have done this. She wouldn't have lied, wouldn't have betrayed me with someone I called a friend. I know, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't undo it, I said, facing her fully. It doesn't erase the nights you were with him, the secrets you buried. It doesn't rebuild what's gone. She got up, stepping closer, her eyes desperate. So what do we do? Just give up? After 10 years? I met her stare, my chest tight. Maybe. Maybe that's all there is left. Her breath caught, and she hugged herself, as if bracing against the words. I don't want to lose you, Nathan. You're my best. That hit hard, a bitter echo of what we'd been. You already did, I said, my voice dropping. The second you chose him. She went still, the truth settling like a stone between us. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I'm filing for divorce, I said. It's not what I wanted, but it's what's right. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't fight it. Okay, she said, barely audible. If that's what you need. It is, I said, the words bitter on my tongue. I can't stay in this, Lauren. Not after all of it. She nodded, wiping her face. I get it. I wish I could undo it all. So do I said, and it was true we'd both failed, in different ways. We stood there, the silence stretching until it pressed against my ribs. Then I turned and walked away, my steps heavy on the path. She didn't call after me, didn't move. At the park's edge, I looked back once, her silhouette small against the bench, the river rolling on. The drive to the motel was quiet, my mind a snarl of thoughts. I'd expected relief, maybe closure, but there was just a deep, quiet sadness. 10 years, gone. A life I'd built, undone. Yet beneath it, a thread of something else, acceptance, maybe. The marriage was over, and with it, the weight of her betrayal. I could start over. That night, I packed my bags, ready to leave the motel's stale air behind. Tomorrow, I'd find a new place, somewhere free of our shadows. It wouldn't be simple, but I was ready to try. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of something faint, fragile, but real. The future was unclear, but it was mine. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the city skyline in hues of orange and purple as I stood on the balcony of my new apartment. It was a modest space, bare walls, a single chair, and a drafting table cluttered with sketches, but it was mine. 6 months had passed since I'd signed the divorce papers, since I'd walked away from Lauren and the life we'd once shared. The sting of her betrayal still lingered, a dull ache I felt in quiet moments, but it no longer held me captive. I'd learned to carry it, like a scar that marks you but doesn't define you. That growth came in small, deliberate steps. Work became my anchor. I poured myself into projects that mattered, like the community center downtown. It was a building meant to unite people, to foster connection, and I couldn't ignore the irony. I'd spent so long shutting everyone out, nursing my broken trust, yet here I was, creating a space for others to find what I'd lost. In a way, it was my redemption, a quiet act of rebuilding for myself as much as for them. I'd also taken up running. Long miles through the park where Lauren and I had our final reckoning. Each stride was a release, a way to untangle the emotions I couldn't always name. I'd pass the bench where we'd sat, her tearful confession still vivid, and feel a twinge of sorrow, but it no longer anchored me. I'd learned to move forward, to let the pain ebb with every step. The toughest part was forgiving myself. For missing the signs, for letting my work eclipse our marriage, for my own failures in the unraveling of us. Lauren's choices weren't mine to bear, but I'd contributed to the gulf between us, lost in blueprints while she slipped away. That truth hit me in the sleepless nights, but it brought clarity too. And with clarity, peace. I saw Lauren once after the divorce, unexpectedly, at a cafe. She sat alone, reading, her face gentler than I remembered. I nearly walked by, but she looked up, and our gazes locked. Time stilled. Then she offered a faint, wistful smile, and I nodded back. No words passed between us, none were needed. We'd said it all in that park, months before. She was my past now, a door softly closed. Back in the apartment, I stepped inside, the warmth a contrast to the crisp night air. The walls were empty, but I had plans, photos, sketches, maybe a painting or two. It wasn't a home yet, but it would be. It wasn't flawless or grand, but it was enough. I rinsed my mug and caught my reflection in the window, older, weathered, but standing firm. I'd lost so much trust, love, the life I'd envisioned, but I'd gained something too, strength, perspective, a self I'd forged through the fire. Lauren's betrayal had shattered me, but it hadn't ended me. I'd pieced myself back together, and now, gazing at the skyline, I saw the outline of what lay ahead. It wasn't the story I'd expected, but it was mine. And that was all I needed.